The New Orleans Saints are going to keep private communications between club officials and the New Orleans Archdiocese. Attorneys representing men suing the church claim team executives advised the Archdiocese on how to publicly address a clergy sex abuse crisis. Paul Murphy has the story first reported by the Associated Press, including reaction from the Saints.
Attorneys for men now suing the Archdiocese of New Orleans claim the Saints helped the church cover up crimes. They say Saints staffers, including Senior Vice President of Communications Greg Bensel, used their team email to advise church officials on messaging and how to soften the impact of the Archdiocese's release of a list of clergy members credibly accused of sexual abuse. The plaintiffs are now asking a judge to release hundreds of emails between the Archdiocese and the Saints. Kevin Bourgeois reached a settlement with the Archdiocese last April. He claims a priest abused him in high school.
The Saints organization obstructed or instructed how the Archdiocese was to withhold information. I think that's important information for us to know about.
The Saints want to keep the emails private for now. The team admits the organization has always had a strong relationship with the Archdiocese and that the church reached out to a number of community leaders seeking counsel on handling the pending media attention that would come with the release of the clergy names in November of 2018. Greg Bensel was in the room when we interviewed Archbishop Gregory Amen about the list. According to the Saints, the advice was simple and never wavering. Be direct, open, and fully transparent while making sure that all law enforcement agencies were alerted. Legal analyst Chick Foray says the plaintiffs are entitled to those documents if they lead to evidence that will be admitted at trial.
The issue before the court is, were the Saints correct in marking those documents confidential, or were they incorrect, and are they going to be allowed to go into the public arena?
The Archdiocese is also fighting the release of the emails. Paul Murphy, Eyewitness News.
A spokeswoman for the Archdiocese told us the church has a policy of not commenting on pending legal matters.